Hi everybody, it's Teresa Mealy with Teresa Mealy Total Health and Wellness. I am here with Dr. Brian Lenzkes. He is part co-host with Dr. Tro on Low Carb MD podcast. Check it out, it's his excellent guests. I'm episode 115, and you do Life's Best Medicine podcast. And he was a movie star in Fat Fiction, a documentary about lots of good information. So you need to check that out. Is that on Amazon? I forget.
It's on Amazon and YouTube. I think it's on YouTube for free.
Okay, see, there you go.
Unless they saw me and took it down, I'm not sure. We'll see. We'll see. It should be there still.
I don't think so. So you're really popular, and I think that you're one of the nicest people I've ever met. You're always smiling.
Thank you.
You're
yeah.
welcome. And
I
Mark,
enjoy this stuff.
Well, it is fun. And Mark rode down in the elevator with someone that was a big fan of yours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she saw him talking to you.
It was probably my mom. No, she's not here. Might have been my wife.
She saw him talking to you, and she's like, are you friends or family? He's my favorite. I just love him. So you're making a huge impact. So we're just going to chat. If you guys have any questions, let us know. I know that most of my following is actually Central Time and on the East Coast, so you're probably in bed by now. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about low carb. We're at the LowCarbUSA conference in San Diego. So it's been super fun learning lots of things. You spoke the first day. So I just wanted to talk about low carb in general. Do you have anything to say about low carb in general?
It is, it's very important. I'm also a direct primary care doc, so I'm a primary care. So, we're looking at all the disease processes, and being at the conference, you can hear from a psychiatry standpoint, from a gynecologic standpoint, all these diseases that we're treating that are frustrating, we realize it's in dying of COVID. They're all related to metabolic disease. So I think it's really come to the forefront now. It took a little while for us to be taken seriously, and now I think now that the ADA guidelines are including us, we're starting to, and we have enough clinical data that we're starting to realize it could really help people.
Yeah, today I was thinking, oh gosh, if you have fibromyalgia, check your insulin. You have endometriosis, check your insulin. You have congestive heart. I mean, the list is like endless.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, fibromyalgia is actually an interesting one because they started using metformin to treat fibromyalgia. I'm thinking, what does a diabetes drug have to do with that? Then you start realizing, insulin resistance with polycystic ovary disease and a lot of these things that we're treating.
Yeah. So I just wanted to go over a little, just to see if you guys have any questions. Hi Sherry, hi Shayna. So low carb gets a bad rap. So I know that this is not normal, not new to you, but I'll have a patient that loses 50 pounds, gets off all her meds, and then she's so excited, goes to the doctor, tells them exactly what they did. In fact, one doctor, primary care, was to my patient, like, I've never seen you look this good. What are you doing? And she said hormones and keto. And she was like, you're gonna die.
Yeah, it's a big jump. It really is. I had the same thing with I had a cardiologist who's a good friend of mine. We have a patient with multiple stents over time, and I'm looking at his insulin. Normal's less than 5 in a metabolically healthy person. His was like 48. Pre-diabetic, has high blood pressure, all these problems, and so he heard I was putting him on a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet, and he flipped out. He goes, Brian, what's wrong with you? This is malpractice. I go, well, let me explain to you, and I showed him some data on how high insulin level was what got him into the situation. And so they're putting him on a low-fat, high-carb diet. His sugars are going higher, his insulin's going higher. The guy goes low carb, he loses 32 pounds, comes off all of his meds basically, blood pressure normalizes, and the cardiologist in his note put, patient lost weight, so his blood pressure normalized. I said, it was because he lowered his insulin, which was causing the hypertension in the first place. Right. So, but it's still a mind block. It's so hard to, for all of us, for me, when I first started, I was looking at all the data and trying to figure out what's the best thing for because weight loss is one thing, but if your patients lose weight and they have a heart attack, then that's not very good.
Right.
That's not very good. So, I think the more we're around, the more we learn, and so much input. Ivor Cummins, a lot of you may know about, and talking about coronary calcium scores, and Dave Feldman's doing a lot of great work in this area. So yeah, it is. I think we're getting more and more data that's going to be helpful. There are some answers we don't have long term that we haven't followed, but seeing what we're seeing with a 3-month sugar average going from 14 down to 5, we know that's going to be when you look at cardiac risk, you start realizing those are the things we really have to attack with high triglycerides and low HDL. It's not just that one number everyone talks about.
No, it's so amazing. The outcomes that you can measure are just so amazing. Would you say, because this is just off the cuff, 95% of hypertension or high blood pressure is insulin related?
I would say, yeah, in my experience it is. Dr. Unwin has shown that scientifically, and a lot of people don't realize insulin we think of as getting rid of the extra energy or sugar, but also it goes to the kidneys and helps, it causes salt retention. So a lot of these patients we'll see, and some of you may have swelling in your feet all the time. When we get your insulin normal, that swelling goes away, so then they get off their water pill, they get off some other medication that they don't need.
Well, and who would even know if your insulin is high, because most providers don't check it. It's not standard of care to check. And so your insulin, your fasting insulin, can rise 10 to 15 years before your A1C goes out of range. And in the corporate medicine model, it's reactive. And so they wait for a diagnosis to be able to give you a medicine.
Yeah, and we'll see that insulin climbing. Ben Bickman did some great work with this, showing that we have 10 years that insulin creeps up and up and up. So it's working harder and harder trying to keep your sugars down. And for a while it can, and then at some point it just gives up and says, forget it. And then you stop making insulin, and then you start getting into trouble with the sugars going up. But you could see, I see it all the time, where someone has a normal 3-month sugar average at an A1C of 5.2 is considered normal, but their insulin is 48, and I think, it's like if I see you sprinting on the treadmill, I know you can't keep running at that pace. You have to slow down a little bit.
Right, something's going to give out. Well, and what's the highest insulin level you've ever seen?
The highest I've seen is 105, and
wow.
The funniest thing was, it was a husband who came with his wife to support her, and when I ordered her insulin, he goes, "Can you order one for me just to be, just to see?" And I was like,
funny.
"Oh my gosh, your wife's, I'm not worried about it. She's my patient, right?"
Right. I think the highest I ever saw was 80, but that's still, so, corporate medicine on Quest, that's the labs that I typically use, lets you go to 19.6 before they even think it's a problem, but we want it 5-ish or below. So that's a big indicator. And then it's hard for people that are skinny to think they might be metabolically, unhealthy on the inside. So that's something to think about too. So you need to order your own labs at home. In Missouri, we have any lab tests now. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, I use Ulta, which is the cash pay of Quest.
Okay.
And for my cash pay patients, so if you have insurance, you can just get it through insurance. But for me, the cash pay price is $12.95.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of doctors just won't order it because they don't know what it means. We never learned those things in medical school. Actually, Jason Fung was the first one I ever heard of ordering an insulin level.
Yeah.
And so, I started realizing, he said, "Brian, when you get a newly diagnosed diabetic, look at their insulin, it's going to be really high." I was like, well, if it's really high, their sugar should go low. If the insulin's grabbing it, he said, but it's not working anymore.
Right.
You get resistant to it. So, yeah, you'll see. And then we said, well, let's give it more insulin. It's like if someone has a drinking problem, you keep giving them more and more alcohol to get the effect, instead of saying, well, why don't we quit drinking for a couple of weeks and taper it down, and then see what happens when you have one drink. You don't need 12 anymore.
Right. So let's talk about drinking. Let's talk about addictions, because I think what I try to really push home for my patients is that this is truly an addiction. I'm an addict, and I got here because of that. And then today I quoted Rob Seifus on Facebook, because he said the only reason people got here to be metabolically sick is because they're trying to get high. And we're getting high with sugar. And it's difficult because sugar is it's accepted in society. I always tell my patients it's at church, it's at weddings, it's at funerals, it's at births, it's at weddings, divorce, breakup, anything. And then they'll have the buffet table, instead of desserts, they'll have fruits, which is the same. So it can be really tricky. And then did you learn in school that diabetes was progressive and chronic?
Of course. Yeah, there's no reversing diabetes. And I practiced for 16 years before I went low carb myself, and I took 0 people off insulin. And then within 6 months, 11 of my patients came off insulin, and that was just unbelievable, because once they got more insulin sensitive, and that's what we're trying to get, it's not necessarily about the weight, it's about being insulin sensitive.
Right. So the insulin you were talking about is at the glucose monitor. So glucose is just straight sugar in your blood, but insulin, you can also measure insulin, which is in response. So it doesn't matter if you eat Oreos, ice cream, pasta, or bread, your sugar goes up, and then your pancreas has to release insulin to bring it down. So we're talking about actual insulin, which again rises way before your doctor's going to do or your provider's going to do an A1C to see that you're diabetic.
So with a lot of my patients, we'll use a continuous glucose monitor so we can see right away the effect of what you ate. So some people are drinking green shakes, for instance, with fruit juice, and their sugars will go crazy. But I know I'm looking at we see the sugar on the continuous glucose monitor, but the insulin goes up to get rid of that sugar. But what happens is your body will overshoot, and then you get a low sugar, hypoglycemia, where you feel shaky and nervous, you have to eat again. Now you have to have a snack, and then your sugars and insulin goes up again. And so we're chasing this waves of hunger and hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia.
Yeah.
And so it's a disaster. If you had eggs for breakfast, it would be even and flat like this, and there would be no big reaction from your body.
And that sugar chasing is a nightmare. And I have an excellent CGM tracing at the office that I go over with everyone that literally looks like you're on a roller coaster. If you can just look at it and visualize the anxiety, the depression, the rage, the anger, inability and irritability and inability to deal with your kids or your spouse, it's a lot. So let me go back. I saw another question. I've lost nearly 90 pounds by cutting out all flour and sugar following the addiction. Yes, Joe Niflin is great. Oh, if that was hers, okay. Oh, called Bright Line eating. Okay, I don't know that. Yeah, that's good. I think we do a disservice if we don't talk about the addiction part of it, because I always say, if someone was a heroin or meth or cocaine user, or even alcoholics go to rehab for 30 days. So you're away from your queuing. Some patients, like realtors or pharmaceutical reps, they drive all day long, and it's like donut shops, all your fast foods, Starbucks, all the places that get you in there to get you on that high and low all day. So they go to rehab for 30 days. You have intense counseling. And if your spouse went to rehab for alcohol, you would not, when they come home, have a bottle of champagne like, oh, I missed you so much. I am so excited that you're back. Let's have a drink. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I've had so many patients, they're doing great, they go low carb, and then the family worries about them because they're not eating donuts and cake and chips. They never had a problem when they were eating them.
Yeah.
And then Thanksgiving comes, they'll say, just try a piece of the pumpkin pie. And some people, when it's an addiction problem, it's just the same point is you wouldn't offer them a beer if they just quit alcohol.
Yeah.
And then the other crazy thing that we do is when we're doing great all week, you say, well, I did great all week, so I deserve to have a piece of cake Friday night, and then the weekend you're off again.
Yes.
So, it's really rewarding ourselves other ways, and that addiction part of it. The funny thing is, on Low Carb MD, it's worth listening to episode number 10 and number 13 with Rob Sivas, because he was the first one. We had a debate, and he was talking to a patient who wanted a gastric bypass, and and he's a gastric bypass surgeon who was trying to talk him out of it. And he started making the point. He said there's two food groups, there's fat and there's protein. And then he started talking, and I corrected him. I said, well, Rob, there's also carbohydrate. And he said, that's not a food, that's a drug. And then we got into this whole discussion about that, which he convinced me by the end of our conversation, because he said, is alcohol a food? I said, well, no, why? Well, because it's not necessary for life and it's addictive. Right. He said, sugar is the same thing, it's not a food. And so because he has sugar addiction, and he realized that when he has one little piece of sugar, he can't stop. And there was a question about monk fruit and artificial sweeteners. And I think that's still, even today, they're debating it here, how much of an effect it has compared to regular sugar. And really, I think a lot of us think of it as a bridge, and it's like, if you say, look, I have to have something sweet and I'm not going to do it without that, then of course that's the bridge.
Yes.
And some people will taper it down one time and they lose their sweet tooth,
yes,
and they don't need it anymore. And then after a while, you just kind of say, yeah, I don't really crave those things anymore. So it's just, I think the more we go that way, the more we crave that sweet taste, and it makes it that much more challenging for us.
It is amazing once you get further in your journey how berries taste super sweet and you're totally satisfied. Or cashew butter sometimes will do it for me, just that creamy fat. So I always feel like if I'm having a sugar craving, sometimes fat will cure it. Like a bridge for me for a long time was pork rinds and sour cream, or pork rinds with melted cream cheese in the microwave and garlic powder. And all I need is like 4 or 5 and I'm good to go. So do you have to IF with keto? Is this better to do? I think if you're eating keto, 3 meals, I think some people need 3 meals. I don't think it's a lot. I think if you're eating the right food, you're naturally going to go to 1 or 2 meals. Do you think that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the natural progression. I have patients come to me all the time and say, I'm not going to fast. I know Jason Fung, I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, okay, no problem. You don't have to fast. You don't have to. But a lot of times they'll come in a week or two and they'll say, I skipped lunch and I wasn't even hungry. It was so weird. And like they weren't doing it mentally they were busy and it was a busy day and they didn't just shove something down because they were in a hurry. So if you have a stressful, busy day, and then people say, well, I don't eat breakfast and lunch, so they'll eat their breakfast a little later, and then all of a sudden they merge those two meals and have lunch and dinner.
Yeah.
Some people do one meal a day, and it just depends really where you are metabolically and what your goals are. If you're trying to really lose a lot of weight, that may be something I'm trying to help you get more insulin sensitive and lower that insulin level down. Because the point is, if your insulin is sitting at 58, you're going to be starving because that high insulin keeps you from getting to your fat stores. So by eating 3 meals a day, even if you're gaining weight at the beginning, if you lower that insulin level down, as long as you have an energy source to get to, but if you can't get to your fat stores, then you're going to be starving. So a lot of us have tried eating salads and green drinks, and you're starving all day and you're miserable and your sugars are going up and down. So, just saying, hey, let me have some eggs in the morning and keep that sugar and that insulin's dropping. So fasting can do it, but also, depending on what you're eating.
This was my life. And I tell patients, insulin's like a bodyguard at a club. He don't care if you got a fake ID. He's not letting you in. You cannot access your fat stores with circulating insulin. Do you agree with that?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So you got to be mindful of all of this. And I mean, as soon as I diagnose someone with high insulin or diabetes, I say you're a double, and it might even be more than that, double the risk for heart attack and stroke. So I always say everyone in our area, there's 2 hospital systems, everyone there, most everyone, unless you have a hole in your heart that they didn't detect, something crazy, but all those people having heart attacks and stroke are just undiagnosed diabetics or pre-diabetics or something going on with their metabolic system.
Yeah, there was a study they did in the country of Colombia, and they looked at everyone who had a heart attack for a year in their hospitals. And what they found was when they looked at LDL and total cholesterol, the risk ratio was 1, meaning you couldn't look at an LDL of 180 versus 60 and say one's healthy and one's not going to have a problem. Then they looked at blood pressure, and it doubled the risk of heart attack. And elevated insulin, almost 700% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. But the thing is, no one checks it. So when I saw that study, I thought, oh my goodness. So as a matter of fact, Ivor Cummins at a conference, my first time here in San Diego actually, he showed me that study, and I went back to my practice not really believing that could be true. And I looked at all my patients who've either had a bypass surgery or multiple stents, and all of them had elevated, I had never checked an insulin.
Yeah.
All of them had elevated insulin levels. And I said, oh my goodness, this is really interesting. Not all of them are obese, not all of them are diabetics. There was one lady that was 96 pounds with a really elevated insulin at 46 or something. So yeah, you can't tell just by looking at someone.
So, and I feel like, I could be wrong, what do you think? Insulin will fall within 48 to 72 hours if you take away the sugar. Do you think it falls that fast?
Yeah, it does.
By half at least?
Very quickly, yeah. We see it fall very quickly. And the only caveat to insulin of being a tool is if the insulin level looks normal, but someone's struggling with all kinds of metabolic disease, because some people overreact and they'll get they have a cookie and they shoot out a ton of insulin to get rid of that sugar.
Yeah.
And so those people get hypoglycemia. So a lot of people will think, well, I'm getting low sugars all the time, so I'm safe from diabetes. It's the opposite problem of high sugars.
Right.
But it's a predisposing factor for getting diabetes down the road because you're oversupplying a ton of insulin. So that becomes an issue.
Well, and that's where the glucose monitors come in, the continuous glucose monitors, because otherwise you'd have to prick your finger before you eat 30, 60, 90, and even 120 minutes, so like 2 hours after. If you just checked your sugar at 30 minutes, it might only raise 20 points and you'll be like, right on, I can have this food. But if you checked it in 2 hours, like the one diabetic grade tracing I show everyone, she hung around super high for like a good hour. So if you don't check as many times, and no one wants to prick their finger that many times. So ask your provider for a continuous glucose monitor. You could get it through GoodRx. Around our area, it's like $130 for 2 sensors, which gives you a month's worth. I think that's fabulous. I did have one patient one time, she's like, I'm not interested to know, because then I don't want to have to make the decision to change.
Well, and sometimes you don't want to see the numbers, and that's, when you look at habits, one of the things about good habits is, you get a delayed result. So, watching your diet today, you're not going to see the results today. It's going to be down the road. And bad habits, you get the satisfaction right now. So whatever it is, you pick your bad habit that you have drugs or alcohol, whatever it is, you feel good now, but you may have a hangover tomorrow, but you don't see that. You don't think about it at the moment.
Right.
With the continuous glucose monitor, you have something, and within 20 minutes, half an hour, or right away, you see, oh my goodness, my sugar just went crazy high, right? Or if you don't sleep well, you'll see the effect. Or if you get stressed, when I gave the talk here, I showed people that my sugar went from around 80 or 90 up to 128 while I was talking, because you get this adrenaline rush. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just the way your body's reacting to kick out extra sugar in case Teresa throws something at me and I have to run away.
Right, exactly. So so cholesterol is really confusing because as you mentioned, when you went back and checked, well, first of all, you said the study about cholesterol and LDL. People that are having heart attacks and stroke, a lot of them have normal cholesterol and normal LDL. But what you guys don't understand is, I mean, some of you might, but we've been hoodwinked by our 3-letter agencies that have been designed as experts to help us. And so there's lots of conflicts of interest. And statins, which are cholesterol-lowering medicines, is $1 billion with a B dollar industry. So there's incentive there. I, in my practice, look more, and I know you do too, at HDL and triglycerides and what kind of LDL you have, because we do know that all-cause mortality goes up. That means dying from all causes goes up when your cholesterol is too low, and especially in the elderly population. Which what's the definition of that? 60 or 65? Do you think?
For the HDL?
Yeah, no, for elderly, like an elderly population. I feel like it's around 60.
I'm not saying it. I got in trouble at the conference because I said an elderly lady at 72, and one of my patients said, "Doctor, I'm not very happy with you right now. That's not elderly." But I said, this lady was frail and elderly. You're healthy and vibrant, so it's different.
Well,
right?
and I always say, I'm not saying you're old, but the people that write papers.
Yeah, I think the study you're referring to, I think they were over 70, if I remember correct. I mean, but the cutoff, it really depends. Some people are 70 with a 40-year-old body, right? So, and some people are 22 with an 80-year-old body. So it depends on your metabolic health too, right?
Well, and so there's such a big drug industry for cholesterol, and we can measure cholesterol, but not forever. Like we just started measuring cholesterol, was in the 50s?
Yeah, and it was total cholesterol, so we didn't even know. They just said your cholesterol went up. So Atkins got in. A lot of people were upset with Atkins because the total cholesterol would go up, but if your HDL, the protective good cholesterol, goes up, 100 points, your total cholesterol goes up, even if your LDL stays the same.
Right. And LDL is just not the best marker. It's like a transport bus that takes around fat and stuff. So if you're eating low carb, you might have 10% fat in there, and so you need more LDL. It's just not the end all be all, but everyone gets so hung up on that.
Yeah, and the caveat though is if I have a patient who's not willing to change their lifestyle and their 3-month sugar level is really high, their insulin's high, that's going to oxidize the LDL into the small dents. Our body doesn't make that. It makes the big fluffy, and then it gets oxidized in the circulation. Right. So if we're eating terrible food, we get more of the sticky type stuff. Right. If you think about it, like if you spill orange juice on the ground and you step on it, you're going to be squeaking all day on the tile. But if you have butter, you slip.
Yes.
Right. So it's a lot of people have really confused how cholesterol works, and so. For me, my biggest concerns if I see really high triglycerides and a low HDL, that's a sign of metabolic disease, and that's generally going to be correlated with high visceral fat, which is the fat around the organs, and also high insulin and high 3-month sugar average. So really, and part of the problem is, as Rob Sivas did a really good job of talking about today, is if you eat extra sugar, people say they're on a non-fat diet. You could be 0 fat, and you could eat a ton of sugar. And that extra energy from the sugar has to be stored as fat, and it stores in the liver as fat as triglycerides. And then we start getting into this whole metabolic disease pathway. And so once you start realizing we can reverse those triglycerides within a day or two of either fasting, ketogenic diet, all these things of cutting sugar out. So you're kind of emptying out the energy. If you think of your liver as a backup battery, you can empty that out, especially if you're exercising and you shift that sugar from your liver stores to your muscle. Yeah,
and so people that follow me know I love Jesus, and so I just don't think we serve.
Too.
Yeah. We don't serve a God who made our liver to make cholesterol that's going to kill us. He didn't make hormones so that we're going to kill ourselves with hormones, like you for testosterone and me, estrogen and progesterone. So, but people get so hung up on that. But I'm just here to tell you that it's sugar and insulin and inflammation that's causing your problems, all of them, which I tell my patients, most modern day diseases. And then sometimes I'm like, well, maybe not like brain cancer, but most stuff is insulin, inflammation, and sugar.
Yeah, and it's bidirectional too. When your hormones aren't working right, you start storing fat in different areas, as we know, going through menopause and getting older. So instead of storing fat in the subcutaneous, the fat that we don't like to see, the hips and the butt and breasts and all that, then you start storing it. When you can't store it out there, it becomes dysfunctional, and you start storing in the visceral fat, which is the really dangerous, concentrated type fat that we get. So sometimes people's arms and legs will get thinner, but their belly gets really big because the fat is redistributing to a different place, and then that's why postmenopausal cardiovascular disease goes up also.
That's it. So the other thing I wanted to kind of hit on, I just lost my other train of thought, but
I lose mine all the time, so we're even.
Maybe I need hormones. Okay, I'm just kidding, I'm on hormones. So I want to talk about this big vegan push lately. There is a huge anti-meat agenda that I don't think some of you guys are aware of. They're trying to make us eat crickets and make it act like it's all normal. I saw a tweet from someone we both follow today, and he said, if I have to eat crickets, I'm already dead. Because if you're in a place where you have to eat crickets, you're already dead. Who wants to do that? But they try to act like 3 pounds of crickets is equal to the protein in beef, but you're just talking like a patty of beef per 3 pounds of crickets.
Yeah, I just saw studies today actually talking about that, and they showed that if you they try to make a porridge out of cricket flour, and the iron levels, it blocked absorption of iron from other foods, even plant foods and all the other stuff. So you're gonna have a big problem. You get iron deficiency, you get anemic, you feel terrible. But yeah, that push is really on, and I really try to stay above the fray on it. My biggest concern with veganism really is, and I've seen it my entire career, mental health issues.
Yes.
Especially if you're vegan. Now vegetarians, if you just add in some eggs, it totally changes that. You get some choline, you get some different nutrients, B12 deficiency, all these things, and you can supplement. I mean, but we had a vegan give a talk here actually, and she was talking about all the combinations of food, and I was like, holy cow, who has time for that? It's like really, really complicated of what you have to do, and you have to make sure you get one legume and one nut and one of this and one of that, and you're like, wow, like half of us can't even figure out how to throw a steak on the barbecue.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot. I just, I think there's who was it last year, or last time I was here? Oh, it was Brenda Fettke gave an excellent talk about how all that started, and it was back in Loma Linda and the Seventh-day Adventist, and it's just crazy stuff. Somehow I got to get that talk out there so people can see that. We need to eat the proper human diet, a human species appropriate diet, which I always say our ancestors were nomadic, and they didn't go and find a woolly mammoth and shoot it, and the women of the tribe didn't look around like, hold on, let me find some potatoes or Brussels sprouts. Like, that was just invented recently. And so if you guys want your health to be your health, you're gonna have to take it into your own hands. It is unfortunate. There's people like Brian, who he sends me patients to Missouri. I've sent him some patients. It's easy when you have a little bit of a network and people can travel to see us, but all of this information is online. Like, your guys' podcast is amazing. The Dr. Nadir Ali, I know the episode because I give it out every day for all those people on statins. I listened to it 3 or 4 times. I took 3 pages of notes because he gives an informed consent, which nobody gets. Nobody knows that statins cause diabetes, breast cancer more than the Women's Health Initiative and Provera, Parkinson's, ALS, muscle pain. Suddenly people can't walk, they can't get out of bed, they can't go upstairs. Then you go and tell your doctor and they gaslight you like, that's not how it works. That's not real. That's not from statins. It's just
and especially if we're looking at the entire risk profile. So if I put you on if you're still eating cookies and donuts all day, and I put you on a medicine that blocks you from converting that sugar over to the triglycerides in the liver, that's the same carbons. Ben Bickman and I've talked about this on the podcast. What happens? You back up the factory, and so then you have sugar and insulin building up in your bloodstream. And we're looking at that data that I was talking about. If your insulin's really high, and I even put Ben on the spot, and I said, if I have to pick one, having a high insulin level or a high LDL cholesterol, what would I pick? And he started laughing. He said, "That's an easy question.
It is easy.
You want a high LDL any day of the week from a mortality standpoint, total mortality." And even from a cardiovascular standpoint, when you look at the data and you think, "Wow, how can we be so focused on one thing?" Because I would say, if you're going to put someone on a statin, you should also talk to them about low carb at the same time if they decide to do that. And then the other thing we do is a coronary calcium score. There's some preliminary data that's coming out showing people with really markedly elevated cholesterol or having normal coronary calcium looking at the heart disease. So it's really, it's still in the infancy, but I think we're going to have a lot more data as time goes on.
Yeah, they focus on the LDL because we can measure it, and there's a $1 billion industry for it, but is there a study that shows LDL and cholesterol is bad?
Well, what's fun is Dave Feldman, who's an engineer, he's not a doctor, he's been looking at this energy model, so he's researched cholesterol more than any of us doctors do. Mm-hmm. And probably about 5 years ago now, he put up a post that, he said, show me a study if your triglycerides are less than 100, your HDL is better than 60, I think, that LDL makes any difference from a cardiovascular standpoint. And all these cardiologists said, you're an idiot, and they sent him threatening letters and all this stuff. And he said, show it to me. And then another cardiologist sent him $5,000 and said, here you go. If someone can find it, I can't find it, I'll pay $5,000. And so he posted and goes, here you go. As far as I know, that money is still sitting in his bank account waiting for someone to come and claim it. So yeah, that tells you a lot, and a lot of people don't like what he's talking about. But I presented a case that, a patient of mine, her LDL cholesterol was 243. The typical cutoff is 130. And so she was concerned, rightly so. And I said, well, do you want it to be lower? She said, yeah. And she was strict keto carnivore. And so I said, okay, this is on a Thursday. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, she liberalized her diet, ate a bunch of carbohydrates and fat, and she dropped her LDL 60 points over the weekend.
So what does it
and,
matter?
And another friend of mine, Jeff Cotterman, who's a trainer in town, same thing. He was going for life insurance. He liberalized. He said, what do you mean you're telling me to eat carbs? Just for the test, just to pass the test. And he dropped his 86 points over the weekend. Friday night we had dinner, and I said, eat bread and eat pasta. He said, what? This is crazy.
This is amazing.
But it's just shifting the energy that our body's using. So if you're running on electricity or running on gas, if you're burning it all, it doesn't matter at the end of the day what you were running on.
Right, and that's what I tell people if they have to go for life insurance. I'm like, look up the Feldman protocol, do it over the weekend, and they'll figure out how to, the LDL will go down, and then no one will say anything. And I have to tell my patients that before they go to their primary for a TSH, because I have them on thyroid, and their TSH is going to be suppressed because I have them on a good dose. So I always tell them to stop your thyroid 2 days before you go, and no one will be the wiser, and everyone's just happy because the TSH doesn't look low or suppressed. Did you learn any of this in school?
No. We just say, eat a low-fat diet, exercise. Really everything was very eat vegan. And maybe at that time they were talking about trans fats. Remember, they took all the coconut oil out because that's saturated fat. We're going to put everyone on trans fat, and they started killing everyone. They said, okay, we're going to switch back to the old way now. It didn't even taste good either.
And it's, I think, so hard for this space because these people are so ingrained in their expertise that they're just not going to give apologies. Like, hey, we got it wrong. Or if they do, it's a very small, it's not splashed across the media. Like, eating an egg a day is like smoking 5 cigarettes. Do you remember that? It was something like that.
Yeah, these were just ridiculous statements, and no one looked it up. How do you equate those things? There's clearly not issue with that. As a matter of fact, Dave just did another study with eating a high cholesterol for a while, and his LDL dropped. And so I've done that too. I went on a pescatarian diet, and my LDL went up 60 points on a pescatarian diet for a month. Why? I wasn't enjoying it as much, and I wasn't eating as much. I was losing weight, so I was kicking fat out into my circulation to see it. So yeah, you can monkey with the numbers a lot, but we're seeing a lot more. Really, as you said, God made us in a way to survive, so why would we be trying to kill ourselves? So it's really a last-ditch effort when we're getting metabolically sick. We run out of place to put all that extra energy, and then we start overflowing and getting into trouble. Some people could be 800 pounds, and some people could be 150 pounds to get type 2 diabetes. I've seen the whole spectrum, and I've been surprised myself.
Hi, Sue. Yes, so statins cause beta cell dysfunction, which is the pancreas cells that release insulin, and it has I feel like it's in the 80 percentile that it causes diabetes. I want to say it's 87%, but yes, they do. So that always boggles my mind. When patients go in and they get diagnosed with diabetes and their cholesterol and LDL happen to be normal, they get put on a statin.
Well, the other thing that Dave is showing through this energy model is, a lot of times we'll see diabetics and their triglycerides will be 650,
yes.
Right? 650, and their HDL is 22.
Gosh.
And they go, yeah, but your LDL looks good. Well, the LDL looks good because there's so many triglycerides floating around that it hides the LDL cholesterol.
Right.
So if we get rid of some of those triglycerides, what happens? The LDL starts going up because they ride on the same boat basically. So you're taking off half the passengers, and the remaining look like LDL, and they say, oh my gosh, they're getting sick. But their triglycerides are dropping like crazy. So that's why when you're eating a high carb diet over the weekend, you pump up your triglycerides, and that hides the LDL. So it's just a shell game.
It's so crazy. It just boggles my mind. And some days I get super frustrated, and other days I'm like, whatever, I'll just keep saying it, but we're up against a lot. There's old dogma, and everyone has confirmation bias, and no one likes to admit they're wrong, but I do feel like people in this space are a little more open-minded to be able to say, like, hey, let me shift my thinking, or let me look at this, and you guys, I piggyback off you guys a lot, like you and Tro and Ben Bickman, that have really went back to the literature and pulled all this stuff out that they just hide in basements, like the Women's Health Initiative, which is what I base my hormone stuff on. They did low fat. It was not good for women to be on low fat. What did they do with that? just hid it. They just didn't publish it.
Yeah, and the other thing that was a huge one was they took institutionalized men and they put them on margarine versus butter. And so when they did the analysis, margarine, the LDL cholesterol was lower. The LDL was lower on margarine, but their cardiac events went up dramatically.
Wow.
So they buried it and they said, okay, we know LDL is a problem. How can this be? They couldn't justify, even with some of the new diabetes medicines, they're decreasing cardiovascular risk, but they raised the LDL cholesterol. So that's a conundrum, and people are looking at that saying, wait a minute. And then you look at France, and the 7-country study was like a 21-country study,
yes.
and they dropped out all the ones that they didn't like. And so there's a lot of that cherry picking where you want the answer to fit your paradigm rather than saying, okay, this is what the answer is. Let's try to figure out why.
Well, if you don't come up with the answer that the people are funding the study want, then you're not going to get funded anymore. So there's a lot of, like you say, a shell game. I saw a documentary one time that they call in statisticians at universities and say, however you need to make this work, you need to make it work. So to me, that's absolute risk and relative risk, which can be very confusing, and that's how they manipulate the statin stuff.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff like that where it's very confusing. For instance, winning the lotto, say you have a 1 in a billion chance. Well, if you buy 2 tickets, you have 2 in a billion, so that improves your odds, right? But it's still like the odds are so low of winning,
right.
So they could charge you more for each ticket, saying, well, you're gonna get close, your odds are so much better. Well, they're not. It's still have 2 out of a billion chances, to win.
And in California, gas is almost $6 a gallon, so I'm not playing the lotto out.
Yeah, don't play it.
The odds are not good. So, well, I don't know if you guys have any other questions, but you can put them on there. People here in these kinds of conferences are all like-minded. It is nice to be in your echo chamber for a while, but you do have to be your own advocate. And so how I always end my posts is know better and do better. How can you do better if you don't know all the information? And this unfortunately means going out on your own and listening to podcasts and all this other stuff that's out there on the internet for free. So like Brian has 2 podcasts that you could go listen to, and they have amazing guests, which I recommend to all my patients go listen to. Then you end up hearing one of their guests that has a podcast, and then you go down another rabbit hole. I mean, it's just amazing. I know what I wanted to say about cholesterol. Mark, hormones, which we do at our office, can significantly change lipids. He had pattern B, LDL, we've been on hormones for 9 years now. It wasn't until we changed to carnivore in 2019 that he changed to pattern A. So that matters.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is pattern, A and B. So the B is bad, and so if you're in pattern A, that means that you're not having a lot of the oxidized LDL, the small dense one that cause a problem. You have the floaty ones that don't cause a problem. So I have a patient actually that had really high LDL cholesterol. Her previous doctor put on a statin. She converted from pattern A to pattern B because it raised her insulin and sugar levels. Now she's got pattern B. You're like, well, heck, you're better off having a little higher cholesterol in pattern A. So really, we start looking at the data and you start looking at, there's always going to be outliers. But yeah, that's absolutely true, how the hormones play a role. Thyroid plays a role. Yeah. And so, normalizing the thyroid before you start monkeying with the LDL and, all those kind of things are pretty, a lot of doctors don't even talk about those things.
Right. So Sue, I'm biased because I love hormones because they saved my life. But I do think hormone replacement therapy, if you have no ovaries or your ovaries has sent in the resignation letter and they aren't working anymore, it gets cortisol activated because then the adrenals are kind of like, what's going on? And they look at the ovaries are like, don't look at us. They start looking at the thyroid. Then you don't sleep because you have hot flashes and night sweats. That spikes cortisol. All of this adds to weight gain in peri and postmenopausal. So for sure, I personally think it can be a big deal. Now, I have lots of people in my practice, half take my diet advice, half don't, and they still do amazing on hormones because you feel better, your sex drive is improved, all this other stuff that happens, you're protected cardiovascularly, osteoporosis, and all this other stuff. You don't have to do both, but what I tell people is when you do both, you are like a nuclear bomb, and you are unstoppable. So. Yeah,
and especially if people are plateaued, they're struggling, My wife sees someone, but I'm not going to say who, that, really, because it's outside of my scope, it's outside of my area of expertise. So I say, let's get the best people we can,
Right, because we don't learn that in school either.
Yeah, and it's important to see how it all works together. And when we're like-minded, the worst thing is to have 2 different specialists or saying, oh, you have to be vegan, okay, you have to be carnivore. It's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And each one says the other one's killing them.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's and just to answer that my other concern about a vegan diet is getting enough protein. That's really, really a
Yes.
problem with bioavailability. And so losing muscle mass makes you, like, our biggest place to store sugar is in our muscles. But if you have no muscles, then that's less sugar you can store there now as to store in fat. So a lot of people don't realize we worry so much about weight. So if you starve yourself and you lose 50 pounds, but 20 pounds of that is muscle mass, you're in big trouble. Because when you start eating a little bit more, it's all gonna cause insulin resistance. Your insulin's gonna go high, then you get into this trouble. So all of us who've yo-yo dieted over time, it gets harder and harder.
Yeah.
You know, it just does. Like, I use the example of boxers. They'll fight at a low weight, and then the next time they're 10 pounds heavier. Then the next time they fight, they're 10 pounds heavier.
Yes.
And these people are working out like crazy, but the body's not letting go because you starved me all those other times. I'm not letting go of this visceral fat. So we see that they retain more visceral fat, even though they're working out more than any of us can.
Right. Your body was divinely made. And so it knows exactly what it's supposed to do. If we support it the way we're supposed to, then it's going to work how it's supposed to in most cases. The other thing about that is, you know, like I turned 50 last summer, and so even after 40, you start to lose muscle mass. Definitely after 50, that's what we should really be looking at. In our office, we have an in-body machine. So
I use one called Sika that's similar.
Same.
Yeah.
So you can see the visceral fat. And when Mark or our nurse goes over that with people, he's like, visceral fat is a big marker of health. And that's an inflammatory, visceral fat is inflammatory. And so here we run into the inflammation, insulin, sugar, all the modern day diseases. So we just have to do better, and you can't do better until you know better. So
yeah, and the body mass index, someone like Sean Baker, who's all muscle, is obese. And you look at him, he's all muscle. Mm-hmm. So the BMI is not a good marker. No. The visceral fat, knowing your subcutaneous visceral fat, you know, and muscle mass is really, really helpful for bone density and everything else.
For everything. When Mark was in the military, because he's so jacked all the time, his BMI would always be high. So then they'd have to go do the little calipers and tape tests. And he's like, you can look at me, I'm not obese. You know, BMI is the worst thing. And what I tell my patients, make sure you measure, because the scale is a liar. Like the enemy, liar. And the scale is not going to reflect what's going on inside, but measurements, so you like bust, legs, waist, you know, the usual, that is a better marker. And then those PCOS women that I see, you're not going to lose 25 pounds in the first month like your husband or your best friend. It's going to be slower. And so we have to just work with all different types of us and figure out what works for us. But I'm telling you right now, in front of all these people and Jesus, I would die tomorrow if I stayed like this. I would never go back to eating the standard. I was miserable with the standard American diet, and I exercised at least 5 days a week and sometimes twice a day, taught aerobics, like all this stuff. I was in the gym, and I was always 35 pounds overweight because I was eating banana and spinach and kale smoothies. Because vegan, which most of us, if you're not eating carnivore or keto, most of you guys are eating vegan. You just don't realize it. But you're eating pasta and bread, grilled cheese,
Doritos,
French fries,
nachos,
yeah, this is all vegan. Vegan is inherently high carb. A lot
quinoa,
of
brown rice, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's the biggest shock for all of us. One of my patients, I have zero exceptions of people eating sushi or white rice and not elevating their sugars like crazy.
I diagnosed a woman with prediabetes, and she's like, I don't understand, I only eat sushi. And I was like, okay. Well, no,
sashimi you could do, but
yes,
not sushi.
But not sushi. Yeah. So, all right, well, that's probably good. I don't know how long it's been. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So sweet.
We're having fun. This is good stuff.
You guys tune into his podcast, and I promise you've got to watch Fat Fiction. I promise you will answer some questions. And you guys did all those CGMs on there, and it's just amazing when you have that data and you visually see it, you can't unsee it, which is our problem.
Yeah, I love Fat Fiction, and the Magic Pill is excellent too. You know, it's another one that is along the same lines. They follow real people, and you see what they do. You know, Jason Fung was in that one, and you know, a lot of good people and great patients of mine that are still here, still doing it. And you know, it's just great to see the results. You know, one of my ladies came off 150 units of insulin, had severe neuropathy, could barely walk. Now she's in here working out. You know, it's so great to see that. Yeah, I mean, it gives me the chills. It's amazing. So you guys have got to do better, but you have to know things first. So look into not the literature, just listen to, you know, so what I tell people too, when they come into my office, like so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, like just align with somebody and follow them. You know, like if you don't want to go searching through the literature and all this other stuff, just align with someone you think you can trust and go there. So Yeah, and get a friend, get someone who could do it with you, have some accountability, and say, hey, let's do this together. Because when you feel like you're alone, it's horrible. Like here, so many people are happy they have a community. They're like, oh my gosh, everyone's eating the same thing as me. But it's hard to be the only one. But being able to stand up and do it too, and say, okay, let me give this a shot. Give it a legit shot for a month or
30
so.
30 days. That's it.
Yeah.
I started carnivore 30-day challenge in 2019, and we're in 2022. Still doing it. So, okay, I love you guys. Keep up the good fight. Your health is in your hands. Nobody else, not a pill, not a person. It's you, okay? So I love you guys. I'm praying for you always. Thank you, Doc Brian.
Thanks for listening to us.
Okay, see you guys. Bye.